Welcome to Get Healthy 360. We have Daniel Kwak of the famous Kwak Brothers. A bit of his story. He first immigrated to the United States in 1999 to Chicago, Illinois. The child of a church pastor, Daniel and Sam came up from a background where they struggled financially. I will tell you, Daniel is one of the most honest, genuine people I've ever spoken to. And I feel like even though he came from another country, especially in the political climate we have right now, I feel like even people born in the US feel disenfranchised from
Mm,
the US. They feel like they're growing up in a country that's not really their own. They're seeing people achieve things with financial success, especially on social media. So I feel like even though he's from another country, but now he's in the US, I feel like a lot of people really identify with his story of coming from, even if you were born in the US, as an outsider growing up in the US, because there's definitely a huge divide right now of the have and
yeah.
have nots. I will say Sam and his brother Daniel began their real estate investing career in 2014, which is really not that long ago. They did have a mobile DJ business that they started in 2012. And then after years of struggling, they got into real estate, which is what we'll talk about. They had their financial breakthrough in 2017 when they went from 0 to 75 units in 1 year. We'll talk about that for anyone who is struggling and they're trying to find their path. And we'll talk about their force strategy. We'll also talk about how he manages his work life, his personal life, and opportunities that we're going to talk about for everyone to really benefit from the extreme amount of time and effort he's put into learning about real estate.
Mm.
So, Mr. Kwak, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, man. Thank you for your kind words.
Well deserved. So, do you want to tell us what was it like coming from another country to the U.S.? Um, I'm how did that go?
Yeah, so I had the fortune of being really young. I mean, I was 5 years old, and I mean, looking back, it was kind of a blur. And you know how kind of like when you're kids, like if you're poor or you're rich, you kind of just assume that all kids live like that, like live like the way you do. So like I remember, oh my gosh, like we were at a park one time, and my mom was picking up like the weeds, like the dandelions and all the stuff, and I later found that on our dinner table like 2, 3 hours later. And same thing was like, living in Chicago during the winter, right? It gets really, really cold. And there'd be times and days where we couldn't afford to pay our heating bill. So we had to sleep in the car. And so, for me, I thought all kids grow up like that, but what it did, thankfully, is it taught me the value and really the value of a dollar. It taught me a lot of the hard work and whatnot. And, as I've gotten older, I've kind of learned that honestly, whether you grow up rich or poor, like you're gonna have your own set of challenges. Like just because you grew up rich, it doesn't mean that you're more likely to succeed, or you had to work a lot less. There's your own challenges that you had to overcome. So I would say to answer your question, it was very much of a blur. I remember I have a lot of different memories. I remember struggling for sure a lot. But the biggest thing that I would say was a disadvantage is when you grow up poor, you learn poor. If you know what I mean.
Can you explain that? I feel like that's a really worthwhile thing to get into.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, have you ever met, and you would know, Kris, because you're in the medical industry, but, you probably met a lot of people where it's like, oh, like my dad was obese, his dad was obese, and, like I had my uncle's obese and all these things. So, like, they oftentimes put themselves in the framework, the mental framework that's who they are. And they associate that as part of their identity. And when I grew up poor, when I grew up in a world where I was constantly being told, no, we can't afford it, or we can't do this because we don't have the resources, I started associating that with my identity. And, I was always naturally a big dreamer, right? Like my dad being a church pastor, I would always meet missionaries and, other pastors who were traveling to places like Africa and, Southeast Asia and, solving some of the world's biggest problems. And one of the things that they always lacked was money, And so, I made it my personal mission, when I was like 17, 18 years old. I was like, man, I want to be the guy that writes the check for these individuals to go out and do really, really cool stuff. And I think in turn, that allows me to do really, really cool stuff. But it took a while to get there because, again, the mental framework that I associated my identity with not having enough, not having the resources, not having these things.
So, at what point did you realize that you were poor and you were financially different than other kids?
Yeah, so I remember in middle school when I got made fun of for wearing the same clothes every day. That's when I was like, this isn't normal, right? Like I started like this kid. I still remember his name too. I won't say his name, but in case he listens to this podcast,
Sure.
which you got a lot of viewers, man. So I mean, he probably does. But you know, he was like, yeah, like he'd make fun of me for wearing the same clothing, and I think I only had like 3 outfits that I would interchange. And you know, when you're at that age where you know you're in the 8th grade or you're kind of in high school, like it's all about just being accepted, right, amongst your peers, right? Like you just want to be accepted and you want to be known badly and you want to have friends. And the last thing you want to be is an outcast. And so that really hurt. So I remember like crying in class and trying to hide it, right? Like making sure the other kids know that I'm just like, I was like, right? Like I'm still like
Yeah.
pretend coughing and all this stuff. But that's probably the first time when I realized like, oh, like I'm like our family is a little different.
How did you go from the transition then where you realized where you were financially and then made that step into I believe I can do more. Where did that belief come from? Because you're right, there are people who say live in poverty, or if one person's overweight, then everyone's overweight. Or
Yeah. Yeah. I'd say probably my relation, if I'm being honest, probably
Mhm.
my relationship with God. Um, and somebody told me one time, it's like, Daniel, you like, how can you dream so small when you serve a God that's so big? And that stuck with me for a very, very long time. And you know, as I seeked and as I pursued what that meant, what I got in return was a daily feeling of gratitude. You know, like that's what I found. You know, that's at least for me what was at the end of the road of seeking that. It was just gratitude of just like, man, like I live, first and foremost, I live in America. You know what I mean? Like I live in America. It's the greatest country, right? I mean, they call America the land of opportunity, and it is. But if you look at it not just from like a vertical, like a yeah, kind of like a vertical standpoint where it's like, hey, like US versus other countries. If you compare the United States today to other countries of the past, like 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 1,000 years ago, like there's never been a better time if you live in America to have upward mobility, right? Like there's never, like that's unheard of. Like imagine thousands of years ago where, you know, you grew up in the serf kingdom, right? And you had the legit landlord, and you
Mhm.
know, you had the caste system and all this stuff. Like it was very hard, right? Very hard for you to advance upwardly. But today, you know, I mean, you could literally go on YouTube and learn how to, you know, invest in cryptocurrency or invest in stocks, or you know, you can go to a you know university to get a 4-year degree, and you can easily make 6, 7 figures within 3, 4, 5 years of working really, really hard, and have a different life for you and your family. So honestly, man, it's gratitude. That was the big shift and the transformation for me, and that started with my relationship with God.
In speaking with other people with a strong Christian faith, or other faiths as well, there's often a guilt associated with doing well. There's that there's really a lot of guilt with like, why should I do well? I should give money away and be poor. Um, how did you come to terms with that? Because even with people who are not who don't have a strong faith, they still have this feeling of I don't deserve to have these
Yeah,
things.
yeah. And like my answer, and that's something that I've prayed about, talked to many different pastors, and not even just pastors, but priests, rabbis. You know, I mean, I've talked to Muslims, right, Buddhists, right, about the concept of money. And obviously, if you look at the Buddhist faith, right, like the apex, right, is just nirvana, which is everything has no meaning. You
Mhm.
know, it's very easy to think about money as a very materialistic aspect and things that we should stray away from. But I actually found it to be such a beautiful thing where I think if you're a person that has a very strong religious foundation, it is tempting. You are right when asking a question that's like, it's very frowned upon to be rich,
Mhm.
right? But for me, in my walk with Jesus and my relationship with God, it hasn't formulated a guilt of making a lot of money. It's actually formulated how much more there is beyond money, and how less significant money really is. Because as I've gotten closer and as I've been walking with Jesus on a day-to-day basis, it's like, wow, there's so much more. There's so many more bigger things, more important things than just money. So I'll give you a great example. So a couple of weekends ago, I was actually at a retreat where, you know, it was full of what I would call big dogs, right? Like, I mean, 2 minutes in, I met an MBA owner, right? And we're all kind of just laughing, we're all hitting off. And during the 4 days I was there, right, like nobody mentioned a single word about how much money they made or what they do or how big their business is. And these guys, they own multi-billion-dollar companies, but for them, it was all about, and everyone there, by the way, like was walking with God, had a great relationship with God. And what was amazing was, every single one of us, we talked about things that really mattered, which was our wives, our kids, our families, the impact that we want to have. And it just so happened that money is the tool to make that happen, So I'm the type of guy where everyone's different, right? But for me and my wife, like I drive a Hyundai, we live in a very humble townhome. Like I'm not driving around in Lamborghinis or Ferraris or anything like that. But what I do enjoy and do with my money is that every single day, at least almost every single day, God will typically just give me a little nudge, right? Says, hey, your friend over there, I want you to give him about $500 because he needs it. In some cases that number is bigger, some cases that's lower, but for me, that's been my relationship with money, and that's how I operate on a day-to-day basis. If that makes sense.
It does. So we've spoken offline about your relationships, and you have fantastic, healthy relationships with people. And you became a millionaire at a really young age, and to your credit, through really hard work. None of this was gifted to you. You didn't have wealthy parents. So they say that your wife or significant other will either cause 90% of your happiness or 90% of your headache. And you, again, became a millionaire at a very, very young age, early 20s. And other people on, say, social media, they're posting pictures of themselves with a lot of multiple women in bikinis, etc. But they're not really portraying any sort of wholesome relationship. So, and in speaking with other people, some of their biggest headaches are the person they chose as their significant other. The divorce rate is high, so there's clearly a lot of selecting process that people should go through. How did you decide on how to pick a significant other?
Yeah, great question. And by the way, I'm only 28. I've only been married 3 years. But to your point, and I a lot of what you're talking about, I've experienced. I think I hit $1 million status at 23 years old, and I got married at 25. And when you're 23, making the money that you're making, and I don't think I'm ugly, at least, right? But to your point, like every city I traveled to when teaching real estate and being on stage, I mean, sure enough, like every time there'd be a really, really good looking girl who come up to me and go, hey, like, I actually happen to live 20 minutes from the airport. Would you want to just crash in my place? Right. And it happened every single time. And thankfully I didn't give into the temptation, but I had the fortune of being able to hang out with a lot of older individuals. And, when it comes to overall health, right, because this is what your podcast is all about, health, whether it's financial health, whether it's physical health, spiritual health, one of the things I always tell people is hang out with people 15, 20, 30 years older than you are, and ask really insightful questions and pay attention to what their life is like. Because, one of the things that I did at 23 is I hung out with a lot of 40, 50, 60-year-olds. And one of the common patterns that I've observed was a lot of these guys who are really wealthy and successful in business, they were on their second, third, sometimes fourth or fifth marriages. And, I was asking myself, why is that? And that's one of the things I was always, yearning for, as well. If I ever get married, I want it to be successful, right? So I had an experience at 22 that changed my life forever. So between the ages of 19 and 22, I didn't want to get married. I thought that women stood in my way, and having a wife would stand in my way of building a multi-billion-dollar company and, like building hospitals in Africa. Like I wanted to do some really cool stuff, right? And I thought they were going to stand in my way. But I remember, so background is I used to do music for churches, right? So I used to lead the worship, and I used to go to a different church every single week. And one of the things that I did is every church I went to, I would ask who's been married the longest, and I would ask them their keys to success. Because I'm a guy that believes in how you do one thing is how you do everything. And if you can be really successful in your marriage, you could probably be really successful in your business and all these other things, right? So I found a couple, I met a couple one day in Grand Haven, Michigan. I still remember this small church. There was 35 people who attended that Sunday morning. And I met a couple that had been married for 74 years. And the guy was like 90 something. And, they got married when they were 16, 17 years old. And, it was during a time when that was more acceptable, right? Getting married at that young of an age. And I asked him, what's the secret? And immediately the guy started asking me questions. He was like, okay, kid, how old are you? tell me about what you do, what you want to do. And so, I'm 22 at the time, and, I was a year into starting Kwak Brothers, and, we were doing pretty well. I think that was the first year where I made 6 figures ever in my life. And he just started asking all these questions, like, what are my hobbies? Okay, you like to play basketball, work out, great, fantastic. And so he goes, the last question he asked me is, do you want to be happy? And I said, well, yeah. He goes, okay, great. Do you want to be happy? And I said, well, of course, right. So he goes, let me paint a picture for you, right? And he goes, let me paint a picture of what your life is going to look like in 5 years. So you're 22 now. 5 years from now, you're going to be 27. You're making 6 figures now. You're probably going to be making 7 figures because you're a sharp kid, right? I can tell. You're going to be able to work out, however much time you want. Or if, again, at 27, you're going to be single, right? You can work out however much you want. You get to, have sex with any girl you want. You get to travel anywhere. You could drive whatever you want, live wherever you want at 27 years old. You don't think you're going to be happy living that life? And I said, well, that sounds pretty good, right? I said, great. So if you want to be happy, don't get married, right? That's what he said. He's like, if you want to be happy, don't get married, because that's what life's going to look like for you at 27 years old. And then he told me this: however, if you want God to teach you about sacrifice, about commitment, and about growth, get married. Because there's no better way for God to teach you what those 3 words mean, according to him, than to have someone like a wife who could, let's be real, critiques you and gives you feedback, right? And knows who you are at the most intimate levels and could give you constructive feedback with love and kindness and do this journey called life together. And so after he told me that story, after I experienced that story, that's when I was like, all right, like, God, I'm open. And when I met Lisa, I still remember hearing a voice of kind of just going, that's her, right? Like, that's the one that I'm going to use to teach you about what it means to commit, what it means to grow, and what it means to sacrifice. And I'm sure having kids adds another layer to what those 3 things mean, right? You guys can attest to it. I can't, but I would say,
kids will test you. They will test you and teach you all sorts of
sure.
stuff.
Absolutely. But if you're talking about health, right? A lot of times the things that, make you uncomfortable initially end up being the most healthiest things for you in the long run. And I would say that's the thing with my marriage, my wife and I, we're constantly going back and forth, right? Like, there are days where I'll just be very honest and authentic. I think about that other scenario. It's like, man, what if I didn't get married? I'd be 28 making 8 figures, right? Like, driving the car, whatever. Like, I'd be living the life, right? But there's the other end of the spectrum too, where I would not be who I am if it wasn't for Lisa, if it wasn't for what God did through her and what I've learned through our marriage. And so I'd say it's the healthiest thing I've ever done.
Health is a funny thing where everything painful in the short term is great long term, and everything great in the short term is miserable in the long term. It's like potato chips. Life
That's right.
is like potato chips. How do you navigate? And I feel like this is a great question for everyone, including Gabe and I. Well, I'll speak for myself. For me, is how do you navigate conflicts with your wife? Because let's say you're working too much, and she's like, you should stop working so much, or you like, just how do you navigate that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, at 28, I'm not saying I have all the answers, but
Sure.
These are things that I have found to work for me, right?
Mhm.
And I'm glad you're giving me the platform to kind of just share that. And I love to hear you and Gabe's answer as well after this. But one of the things that I've learned in my journey is it's to see the heart of what the individual is saying. Because when my wife is saying you should work less, which by the way, she's never told me that, but she said, but if she were to say, hey, you're working too much, what I immediately try to do is, okay, what is her heart behind that sentence? What is she really trying to tell me? What she's really trying to tell me is, hey, I want you to pay attention to me. I want you to love me. I want you to be more present. I want you to value our relationship more than your professional career, which a lot of times the way us men, especially men with high horsepower, the way we operate is we're very compartmentalized, right? Like, once we're married, we get the girl, we want to focus on then building the business and then doing this. And we kind of tend to put things in boxes. And for me, as I've learned, is even in my relationship with God, is that God cares way more about my marriage than he does my business. And that's just the truth. And I've had to learn that. And I think a lot of spiritual health and spiritual maturity is, you're getting to a point where you care more about what God cares about than more so what you care about. It's kind of like maturing when you're a child, right? Like, when you're 8, 9, 10 years old and you have kids that age, it's very hard for them to truly comprehend the beauty of you valuing and desiring the things that your dad wants, right? Like when your dad tells you, hey, you got to get home by 10 p.m. or when your dad tells you, hey, you got to, go to sleep by a certain time, it's out of love, right? So like even the 16-year-old, girl, teenager who's going through puberty and hormones and all these things are happening, and she gets mad at the dad because the dad wants her to come home by 11 p.m. or 10 p.m. Maturity is understanding, for her at least, maturity and health in that relationship is understanding that, hey, my dad loves me and he wants me to be safe and he wants me to be home by a certain time, because that's the heart behind that sentence. That's his heart behind that statement. Immaturity is selfishness and kind of going, no, I want to have a good time and stay out as late as I want till 1 a.m. because that's what I want to do. And my dad is standing in the way of that. Therefore, he becomes the antagonist. And a lot of times in parental relationships, or even business relationships, that happens, or even marital relationships, that happens all the time. Where even in healthy conflict, the keyword healthy conflict, with my brother, who's my primary business partner, like whenever he asks me to do something, right, I can tell two different stories in my head. The first story I can tell is, oh, he's doing that because he wants to exert authority and power over me, but he does not. I'm the actual chairman of the, like I'm the leader here and all this stuff, And then, but the other story that I can tell myself is, okay, what's the heart behind it? And, if you don't understand what the heart behind it is, then you go to that person and you communicate. There have been many times where my brother has told me, he's like, hey, man, in that meeting we were just in, I felt disrespected by you. And I felt disrespected when you said this. And when this happened, this is how I felt, right? Can you kind of give me the background of what you were feeling and what you were doing with that statement you said towards me? Because I don't want to harbor this resentment, because that's simply going to grow. Right. And so, and I do the same thing with my wife. I do the same thing with all my business relationships is, hey, man, like, I felt this way when, this happened. Right. And a lot of times, a lot of it is like, we feel like we have to appear a certain way. And it just, that's BS. It prevents us from having real, authentic relationship, and healthy conflict is a big part of that.
So did you and your brother always get along?
Oh, no, no way, man.
So did you two always
No.
get along? And okay, then how did you go from sibling conflict to healthy adult relationship?
It's probably when we both matured. And unfortunately, men, it takes longer for us to mature, right? Like it took a long time for me to mature. I'll be honest, because the immature me, same thing, right, with the teenage girl and the dad, right? The immature me would tell myself the story that, hey, my brother is not, he's against me and he's doing this to sabotage me and he's doing this, whatever. But the mature me was like, okay, let me see why my brother did that, right? And the more we started doing, the more we started maturing. And by the way, that started, to answer your question, when there was a blowout, right? Like there was a blowout where my brother and I almost came to blows, right? We almost got into like a physical conflict.
Like all brothers.
Like all brothers,
all
right?
brothers.
That's right. But the first 3 years of us being in business, I mean, we would argue every single week, but never get to the core of why we were angry at each other. And that, for me, blows my mind even to this day. And I've seen business partnerships where that goes on for decades. I've seen marriages where that goes on for decades. Where, man, if the other person only knew what the heart was behind the statements and didn't create their own story that they're telling someone in their head of what happened, things would end up way healthier and way more honest. But yeah, my brother and I, we had a big blowout, when I was in my probably mid 20s. And that started just a little bit of us being a little bit more honest with one another. And by us being more honest with one another, we actually started discovering, oh my gosh, so that's what you mean. Like, that's what you're feeling. Oh, you have insecurities too. Oh, so that's how, unfortunately, it had to happen. I wish we would have known the right way to do it from the beginning, but I mean, I'm glad we figured it out 3 years in.
And Daniel, sorry, if I could just jump in,
ahead.
I find that fascinating, right? The dynamic between you and your brother. Maybe if you could tell us a little bit more about the first real estate deal, and like, whose idea was it? Your idea? Was it your brother's idea? Who convinced whom? And how did you two make it work?
Yeah, so I'll kind of just attach what the previous question was and what we were talking about, and kind of attach it to the first deal. But when we first started, we didn't know what our strengths were. And unfortunately, a lot of that was because of ego, right? Like, I assumed that I was great at everything, and my brother Sam assumed that he was great at everything. And because that was the case, a lot of mistakes were made, right? A lot of things that I wish that Sam would have done instead of me, and a lot of things that I wish I would have done instead of Sam. Like I look back and I'm like, man, what were we doing? So getting into real estate was actually my brother's idea. So my initial plan was I wanted to be a high school teacher and coach basketball, and compete in martial arts on the weekends, right? That was my plan, and be a youth pastor, right? But my brother one night dragged me to his real estate seminar where they were selling, the courses at the end of the, whatever. And we bit the bug, right? We were like, look, like we're in our early 20s. We don't have a whole lot to lose. We're not married. We don't have kids. We don't have any real responsibilities. Like, let's try this out, right? Let's give this thing a go. And, we were so poor at the time that we actually had to call our credit card company and we begged them to increase the line so that we could buy this coaching course guru program, And so, shortly after that, I mean, once we got into real estate, I got obsessed. And that's one of the things I tell all my coaching clients that I help do their first deal. It's you got to submerge yourself in what you want to do, right? And if you don't have the time, then invest passively, right? There's plenty of opportunities where you can invest your money into, a partnership like mine or other individuals, and you could just make a return by just, having your money work for you, But I was submerged. I was obsessed, and initially I was obsessed because I was obsessed with answering the question, why did my parents grow up poor? Why did our family grow up poor? And why other families didn't, right? I was so burdened and pained and scarred from the experience of being the poor kid and not being able to go to homecoming dances because I couldn't afford it, not being able to take girls out on dates because I didn't have the money to even feed myself, right? I was so obsessed about answering that question that I started learning about investing in finance and real estate and understanding markets and how they work. So, I mean, I'd get up at like 5, 6 in the morning, wouldn't go to sleep till 1 a.m. at night, and just trying to answer that question. So my brother, as we later find out, he's really, really good at, the technical framework of building a business or just creating a business and marketing. I'm very good at people, leadership, and investing, and, we've kind of, through that process of doing our first deal and the second deal and the third deal, we learned that those were our strengths. And just a fun fact, my very first deal was a portfolio of 4 single-family homes that we bought on seller financing. So that was our first deal.
And how did, like on your first deal, right, you're getting into a new business. And as always, when you're starting something new, there's all kinds of fear, right?
Yeah.
What if it goes sideways and we have to declare bankruptcy? What do I know about plumbing and fixing electrical? And I mean, there's a million things that you don't know, a million things that can scare you. How did you and your brother overcome that initial fear to just dive in and go for it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I've had to learn through my mentors and, a lot of self-seeking and introspection, how to convert unhealthy fear to healthy fear. So I'd say that's true of anything, right? Like there's a healthy version and an unhealthy version of every single thing that's around us, right? And unfortunately, we live in a world of extremes. I mean, gosh, even politically today, right? Like it just seems that like the only thing that we're exposed to is the extreme right or the extreme left. And just on a side note, what I find really interesting is both people actually just want the same things. We're actually a lot more similar than we think, right? Like you take an issue such as abortion, that's been really, controversial lately with the whole Roe v. Wade type of thing. Like on the left, we're saying, hey, like we should allow women to be able to abort, children, right? And on the right, people are saying, no, life is precious. But on the other hand, you take a look at something like, the death penalty, which has been a controversial thing for decades now, where people on, the left are saying, no, life is precious. We should, allow these people to live. And people on the right are like, no, we should kill criminals, right? We should allow that. For me, I just find that so fascinating, right? Like even with the vaccine, right? Like I find it so ironic that people on the right, during the whole pandemic, it's like, no, like my body, my choice, right? And now all of a sudden, right, like with the whole Roe v. Wade abortion thing, it's people on the left who are saying, oh no, my body, my choice. So for me, as someone that I just try to seek the truth, right? I just find that so fascinating that like at the end of the day, we're all just really saying the same things, and we're actually a lot more similar than we think. We just happen to all have different experiences that has led us to the conclusions that we're arriving at. But in terms of converting and getting over the fear of messing everything up, I've learned that there's actually healthy fear. Then it's okay for a part of you to be afraid. As a matter of fact, if you're fearful, that's normal. You should be, because that's the fear that allows you to verify all the expenses, double check all the numbers, and make sure your due diligence is on par and it's super tight. Like you should have that healthy fear. So it's funny, like even with the clients that I work with, when I help them do their first deal, like they're either super reckless and I have to tell them to slow down and adopt this healthy fear, or they're so paralyzed by it that's like analysis by paralysis. Like there's not enough information that they could have before making the first move. So for me, what I've known is that like kind of what the healthy middle ground is sitting down with everyone and having like a strategic session where it's like, okay, this is our process. This is what we're going to do by December 13th. We're going to get this accomplished. By January 1st, we're going to get this accomplished. By that, we're going to get this accomplished. So yeah, great question. But for me, that's the solution, is understanding that there's a healthy and unhealthy version of everything that we have.
To touch on what you're saying, what do you, in your looking and your learning, and you've come from someone with a financially poor background to now you're a lot of abundance, what are some of the biggest differences in just the outlook of someone who is financially poor versus someone who is financially abundant? Because I really like what you said, where we're all very, very similar and we all want the same things. And it's often that just how we view the world and what we expect will determine our financial life and our marriage life and our significant others' lives and our kids' lives, etc. So what are some of the differences of like the poor mindset versus the wealthy mindset?
Yeah, and I think to your point, and I'm glad you brought that up, Kris, because I mean, I think the number one reason why people get divorced is money, right? Like I think money is it's up there. If it's not number one, it's number two, right?
Yeah, it's
like
right up there.
Yeah, it's pretty much up there. And what I found, what the beautiful thing about money is that money itself has no meaning, but you can learn a lot about a person based on how they spend their money, right? Like there's a great saying and a great teaching by Jesus in scripture where he says, where your heart is, there your treasure is also. And he says that, and pretty much that's his way of saying, like, hey, if you want to know what people really, really care about, like, look at where their money goes, right? That's God's way of saying follow the money, right? Mm-hmm. So, for what I find really interesting is like, and I'll use marriage as an example, is we live in a day and time where people invest more in the wedding than they do the marriage, right? Like, what's the average cost of the wedding? So isn't it like 35 grand or something like that now?
That's way more than I spent, but yes.
Yeah, same. My wife and I, we spent, I think, like $1,200, right? And that was food, and we only had like 20 people at our wedding. But like I think the average cost, I think like it was like $37,000, right, for a wedding nowadays. And the question that I ask myself is, are people spending $37,000 on their marriages, right? On premarital counseling, on and on a coach that helps men and women communicate with one another, on vacations that's intentional for a man and a woman to spend time away from the BS of everyday life and just invest in one another, right? And I'm willing to say that most people won't spend that amount in their entire lifetime, let alone in 1 year or 2 years or 5 years, right? So, again, for me, right, the biggest difference that I've seen with people who are abundant and not abundant, and I'm so glad you said those two words, because I've met people who make millions of dollars who are not abundant. They're still poor when it comes to their mentality, right? Is two things. Number one is resourcefulness versus resources. A lot of, and again, I'm going to get a lot of flack for saying this, but this is just the observation, and my allegiance is to the truth, right? But a lot of individuals that I've seen that don't make a whole lot of money, they a lot of times tend to look at the resources, right? A great example of that is, I think, Dolce & Gabbana, Gucci, and Louis Vuitton had record amounts of sales around the same time where stimulus checks were on the big rollout, right? Again, those are just numbers. Numbers do not lie, right? Like you look at Louis Vuitton, Dolce & Gabbana, like during the time when it's a pandemic and we shouldn't be spending any money, we should be investing and saving and being careful for the financial winter. People went out and spent millions of dollars on unnecessary luxury items. If you look at the credit card bubble, it's the biggest that's ever been in the history of the United States. If you look at domestic debt, it's the largest that it's ever been in the history of the United States. So you look at all these things and, where is a lot of the debt accumulated? Well, you look at the numbers, and unfortunately, it's between lower middle class and middle class Americans. That's where a lot of the majority of the debt is accumulated. So I'd say the biggest difference for me, as I've seen an abundant versus non-abundant people, is a lot of times the abundant individuals care more about the resourcefulness, things that they can control. They spend a lot of time reading books on personal development, investing into coaches, spending time learning, listening to your podcast, right? They spend the time doing all these right things because they care more about increasing their ability to be resourceful, right? And at the end of the day, that's why people listen to this podcast or read books or anything, because they want to be more resourceful. A lot of the individuals who don't have aspirations to be resourceful, I'd be willing to bet, are the ones that their bank account will reflect that. They blame so much on, and a lot of people are like, well, Daniel, you don't know, all this stuff. Well, I kind of do. I grew up where my parents didn't have a network. My dad's a preacher. I didn't have any rich friends or anybody hand anything out to me. My family, even when we came here, we couldn't even speak English. So we didn't even know how to get government assistance or get food stamps or, all the social programs that we have nowadays. But, my family, we didn't have that. There would be many days where we went without food and, all this stuff. So, any disadvantage you think you could have, well, man, that was my family. Fortunately, God has blessed us, and my brother and I were wise enough to, focus more on our resourcefulness as opposed to our lack of resources. So, I'd say that's probably, one of the biggest ones. And the second is, how people view money. I think the way people view money is indicative and very resemblant of overall health, right? Like a lot of my buddies who are abundant minded, they see money more so as a tool to create impact as opposed to, things that they need to accumulate more of. And I find that a lot of individuals who are poor, both in the mind and in their resources, a lot of times tend to idolize money and put money as a pedestal. And the proof of that is most Americans think that having an extra $1 million would actually solve their problem. And I find that it does not, right? Money solves only money problems, as I've learned.
If someone's just starting out, what are, say, top 3 books you'd recommend?
I'm a little biased. I'm going to say the Holy Bible, but I don't read the Bible. I actually listen to the Bible the way that it's supposed to be received. Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, and probably Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. You can't go wrong with those selections.
Those are great books.
Yeah, they're safe bets.
And then when you say you listen to the Bible the way it should be received, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so a lot of times when people read the Bible, they treat it more as like a textbook, and instead of stories. So if you think about how scripture was passed down, it was actually through oral. It was through oral, transition, right? It was passed down through the word, through verbal. And in fact, if you look at like the early church, right, if you read the book of Acts and you see how scripture and stories in the gospel of Jesus was passed down, these guys would literally hang out for hours and hours and hours, right? You look at one of the early apostles, Apostle Paul, right? The scripture and the records will show that they would go days, right? Like they would literally just be in a room, with just literally for hours and hours and hours on end, talking about stories of what God's doing in their life and sharing the gospel of Christ. Unfortunately, the temptation of reading the Bible has led a lot of modern Christians to see Christianity and their walk with Jesus in a very legalistic way, in a very religious way, and it's not supposed to ever be that. My good friend and mentor Glenn Murray says that people follow 2 different types of Jesus. They follow an external Jesus and an internal Jesus. When you follow an internal Jesus, it means you're having conversations with him on a day-to-day basis and you have intimacy with him on a day-to-day basis. An external Jesus is following, simply the Bible, not following Jesus, but following the Bible. And I know in John it says the word became flesh, but a lot of Christians today are kind of very judgmental. Let's call it for what it is. A lot of my generation, millennials and Gen Zs, are very turned off to attending a physical church because they see Christians in America being extremely judgmental, being extremely political, which, by the way, followers of Jesus are never meant to engage in political battles. We're not meant to do that, it's so divisive. Like you have Christians who are very liberal, you have Christians who are very conservative, and no one's caring about what the real thing is, which is the kingdom of God. So, that's why I always try to listen to scripture. Well, not only because it's more convenient for me, like when I work out, when I'm in the car, right? It's very tough for people to now find time to actually sit down and read a physical Bible. And I do, once in a while, absolutely. I still find, try to read the Bible because I want to absorb scripture as many ways as differently as I can. But I find that it's for people who read the Bible and, it's very tough to not see it as a textbook, as opposed to an opportunity for God to have intimacy with you through his Spirit.
That's a great answer. You've mentioned mentors. So what are some of the things that you would look for in, and I know you and your brother do mentorship as well, but what are the things that you would look for in finding an appropriate mentor, and what are some of the things you should look for that would be warning signs of this is maybe not a mentor? And my suggestion would be, if someone's going to mentor you, they should be doing the things that you want to do. I mean, if I want to play basketball, I'll probably find a basketball player. I wouldn't find like a soccer player and say, teach me how to play basketball.
Yeah, that's right. No, absolutely. So that's, I mean, I'd say that's the first thing for me is, are they practicing what they preach, and secondly too is, are they willing to speak the core truths into my life, you know? So, I remember there was a crazy story that I had, when I was 24 years old, and I consider God to be my number one mentor, right? I mean, the Holy Spirit, who I talk to every day, I consider him to be my number one mentor. And I remember I was at this group, it was a Wednesday night, and God spoke something to me, and he kind of just goes, "Hey, Daniel, I love that you've built a great business. I love that you give a lot of money away. I love that you're, treating your employees and you're learning to be a great leader. I love the fact that you're doing all these things. I just sometimes wish we could do it together." And what he meant by it, what the Spirit means by that is, hey man, I want to be able to have intimacy with you on a day-to-day basis. That's a core truth, right? So for me, one of the big signs I look for in a mentor is just don't tell me the do's and don'ts, but share with me the heart behind that. Tell me the why, right? Instead of just telling me to, hey, do X, Y, and Z, also share with me why that is, and share with me why it's important to you. For me, that's what I really desire in a mentor is, hey, are they willing to share their heart with me? Are they willing to walk alongside me? Are they willing to, be on this journey with me? That for me is really, really important and really huge.
So you've clearly learned a lot in real estate and in life. You have a lot of really wise things, especially because of the mentors and all the reading you've done. And I feel like, at least my social circle, it's a lot of physicians. Physicians spend a lot of time learning about doctor things. And then physicians often will invest in restaurants for whatever reason, and then they fail because they feel like because they're good in one thing, they can just jump into this other thing they know nothing about, and then it goes belly up. Like that happens all the time. So you've obviously spent, like, I'm sure, over 10,000 hours reading about real estate and investing. So I'd be remiss, and it is a Get Healthy 360 podcast, really encompassing lots of health things. But if you can't afford health insurance, health is difficult. If you can't afford healthy food, life is difficult. If you have to pay medical bills, life is difficult. So I feel like discussing financial health is also really important. So there are two things I think I want to get into: some of the mechanics of real estate investing, and also there are a lot of people I know personally that are very, very busy with their primary job, and they're just like, I don't want to learn another business. I do fine with this business, but I have this money sitting in the bank. We're late 2022. The stock market's not doing well, and I'm sure I'll ask you about this: the returns of real estate versus the stock market, pros and cons. Having a balanced portfolio is a good idea. And then we'll discuss your syndication, which, if someone doesn't want to spend 10,000 hours learning about real estate, you can also just give your money to someone.
That's right.
To invest, which is really no different than putting your money in a 401k, except someone can say, hey, my partner, I've invested this money. How are things going? How can we maximize my returns, etc. So let's talk about first getting into real estate. If someone wanted to do it, because the reason I want to highlight these things is, if you aren't willing, exactly like you said, to put that 10,000 hours in and really master this, then it's probably better to just invest your money with someone else who has that expertise, because either do it and take it really seriously, or just don't do it, because you'll probably end up losing money.
Yeah, so, no, absolutely. Yeah, so I'll get into kind of like the mechanics of real estate first, and we can get into, and I'm sure you have a question for me on the other end of the spectrum there, but yeah, I love real estate because, I mean, I remember when I was first starting and learning about finance and investing, I was kind of picking like, well, what do I want to do? Do I want to be a stock guy? Do I want to be a bond guy? Do I want to be a commodities guy? Do I want to be a real estate guy? Right. And I remember there was one thing that really just changed my life. And there was actually two things that made me decide to invest in real estate and learn about investing in real estate. Number one was, obviously the banks are the smartest and the most richest entities in the world. And the fact of the matter is, if I were to go to a bank and I ask them to borrow $100,000 so I can invest in stocks, they're going to say no. If I ask for a $100,000 loan to invest in cryptocurrency, they're going to say no. But if I were to go to a bank and ask for $100,000 and I brought them a really great cash flowing piece of real estate, they're going to say yes every single time, right? And that, in fact, that's a lot of times how banks get built, right? Is notes and mortgages, and loans backed by real estate, right? I mean, that's for honestly, for saying that's how the biggest and the smartest entity in the world, the banking industry, grew, right? It's on the back of real estate. So that was one. And I was like, oh, okay, there's something there. And number two, I had read an article by Forbes magazine when I was 17 that says that I think it was something like 78% of all self-made millionaires made their money by investing in real estate. And historically speaking, if you look at even looking back thousands of years, right, the people who had the most power were the individuals that owned land, right? If you look at Europe, right, European history, American history, right, even Asian history, the people who held the power and people who had the true wealth, they were owners of real estate. So for me, I think pattern and history continues to repeat itself. And one of the things I love about real estate is that it's the only asset, right, that's tangible, that gives you tax benefits consistently, that gives you cash flow, and also an opportunity to appreciate, and best of all, you can leverage it, right? You could use the future value of money to buy real estate that gives you cash flow, and it's predictable cash flow, right? If you put your money in the stock market, well, I hate to break it to you, but you're not in that boardroom of that company. You don't make the decision on whether or not there's going to be distributions or dividends that's going to be paying out, right? I mean, a lot of people just don't have that control. You might as well just put it, on a roulette table, right? Not that I bash stocks, right? I also invest in stocks as well, but I just do a lot of research on these companies, and a lot of those industries and companies that I invest in are real estate related, because that's what I know, right? But I look at all the benefits that real estate gives, and I'm looking at all the other assets that you can invest in, whether it's crypto, bonds, stocks, mutual funds, ETFs, you name it. And I don't think any single one of those things can offer me every single thing that real estate can offer me, and also with the opportunity to create wealth. So for me, I will always be a real estate guy. And my brother and I have done a lot of other things like buying companies and scaling them, because we're good at that as well. As we're very good at scaling businesses and upping the marketing and whatnot, and we've been very fortunate. But for me, I will always be the most excited about real estate deals for that reason.
So if someone wanted, and I think this is where I'm going with this, is either with this thought of either take it really, really seriously and put a ton of time into it, or invest it with someone who really knows what they're doing. So if someone wanted, starting from zero, and I highly recommend your book, 0 to 75, reading that book, reading the other books you recommended, how would they go about going from 0 to 75 properties? You're saying to someone who knows nothing, and they're just like, I have a little bit of money, what do I do?
Yeah, you can either do it actively, which is kind of like what you said, is you can put in the 10,000 hours and put in all the work. And by the way, I have a lot of physician friends who have done that, and man, it's tiring. It's very, very tiring. And for me, I have a lot of respect for physicians, not only because my parents wanted me to be one, which is kind of the typical Asian parent, right? Yep. But if you think about it, they are the cornerstone of our society, right? Like if things hit the fan and it's a life or death situation, which is the highest stake, right? Like, physicians are one that are called upon, and doctors are extremely important, now I have my own thoughts towards, I have a lot of buddies in the medical industry who don't like the idea that, it's become much more of a business than more so an honest medical practice, right? It's less about helping people now, more about making money. That's unfortunate. But, you could do it passively as well, which is what you're talking about, which is, you could take your hard-earned money and you can invest it into somebody's partnership. And they're the operators, right? They're in charge of finding the deal, negotiating with the seller, setting up the business structure, managing it, making sure that things cash flow, underwriting it, right? Like, they're responsible for all these things. And the beautiful thing about it is my partnership offers this, and many other partnerships as well, is, we give our limited partners, our LPs, a majority of the proceeds, right? So, even in my company, depending on the deal, we give our limited partners 70, 80% of all the proceeds. So, the individuals who are putting in the money, they're making most of the profits anyways, and we just have our share because we put in sweat equity, right? We put in the work, But to your point, it's a great opportunity to take advantage of all the things that real estate offers, all the benefits that real estate offers, without having to put in the time or the stress, and being able to focus on what people do, what they do good at, right? Which is obviously saving lives and helping our society. So I do my best to make sure that our offer and what we offer is beneficial and catered. So for example, I have a lot of physicians that are interested in investing with us and have invested with us in the past. And one of the things we offer is we for a lot of our deals, we offer 100% of the depreciation, which is the tax benefits to our physicians.
So I think you're unpacking a lot of things. So can you go into the details of, let's say me, I'm a busy physician, I have all these things to do, and I have this chunk of money. So I come to you and I say, I have this chunk of money. Is there a minimum amount? And then what kind of return should I get? And because at the end of the day, I don't really care how much money you make. Like, I just want to know what my ROI is. And then can you go into the details of the tax benefits as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So it depends on the deal. So I do deal specific. So, with some deals we have to raise, 2 million, some deals we have to raise 5 million or, 10 million. But the way that it's structured is typically there's an equity piece to it, right? The individuals, in order to be able to receive the advantages of owning real estate, they own a 60, 70, or 80% of the cut, right? And distributions get sent out accordingly, and we take your invested capital, and we would obviously use it to acquire the asset, manage the asset, keep things in reserve. We do all the work, and you simply get a distribution. And we typically do quarterly distributions. We send out a check every quarter based on how well the property performs. I have a pretty conservative set of things that have to pass in order for us to do a deal. So one of the things I tell all my investors a lot is, hey, you won't get a whole lot of opportunities, but the opportunities that I do send you, they're great. A lot of individuals do deals just for the sake of doing deals, right? Because they have a lot of investors that have to, they have to allocate their funds, right? Otherwise, they're going to take their money and go somewhere else. But I'm not a big believer in that, because I have a lot of individuals in the industry that I know personally who have done not great deals, deals that I don't think are going to end up great in 3-5 years, especially with this upcoming potential recession, right? Potential crash. I don't think a lot of them are going to survive. But regardless, they did the deal because they had a bunch of money raised and they had to do it, and they felt the pressure of it. So for me, I'm a little bit more conservative when it comes to vetting what deals I want to do. I think last year I took a look at 1,600 deals and made offers on 8. So if I'm bringing you a deal, it's good. And typically my specific numbers I like to do is I don't like to do a deal unless an investor is getting at least a 15% internal rate of return, which is between income and growth. So I don't want to get too technical mumbo jumbo here, but
well, it's because I know people are going to ask. So when you say internal rate of return, so if I give you $10,000 as an easy number, let's say $1,000 just to make the percentages. I give you $1,000. What does that actually look like?
Yeah, so 15% internal rate of return, and we try to go 50-50 income and growth. So income is cash on cash return, right? Which means that, hey, if we were to do a deal and if we give a 16% return, 8% would be cash on cash. So if you invested, let's say $100,000, okay, you get $8,000 in cash on cash return for that year, right? And then the other 8% that make up the 60% that's growth, meaning that, hey, congratulations, we've gained 8% in equity, right? In our equity position, right? Whether it's through our principal that we've paid off in our mortgage, or whether it is something that we did to increase the value of the piece of real estate, right? Congratulations, your $100,000 has grown to $108,000, right? So between those two things, income and growth, and there's a lot of other returns as well, like tax benefits and what we call phantom returns, but for the most part, in terms of things that investors care about, I typically try to do a deal that's equal to or over 15-16%, that range.
And do they have to leave the money with you for a certain amount of time?
Yeah,
get the money out.
Yeah, so it depends on the deal. So we might do a deal where we have what's called a 5-year exit, meaning that, hey, we buy the property, we increase the rent on it, and then we either sell or refinance 5 years later. Although based on what I'm researching and seeing in the market, probably not the best route to go, because I'm willing to bet that in 3 to 5 years, values of real estate is probably going to be lower than they are today. So I don't want to exit. If anything, for me, my philosophy is always long term. Mm-hmm. The thing I always tell myself is, do something today that your investors are going to thank you for 10 years later. That's my philosophy. Is I'm a multi-generational guy, and not that we're going to hold the properties for that long, but if a property is cash flowing really great and the money's growing, make sure if the opportunity were to come along, that we would entertain it. But for me, I think there's greater impact and a better investment philosophy by holding things long term.
What if they want to get the money out then?
Yeah.
Like what happens? Like something happens, they're like, I just need my money back. Is that possible? Or they're like, nope, you signed a deal, it's locked up. How does that work?
Yeah, so the expectation I set with my limited partners is, hey, I expect for you to keep your money in here, and the last thing that I want to do is take your last $100,000, right? Please, that's what I don't want. I always want our investors to have a healthy reserve. Hey, let's still make sure you're financially healthy, even if this deal were to go south, because as much as I spend a lot of time, I spend 75% of my time protecting the downside of a deal than the upside and how much money we're going to make. That's just, again, for me, my philosophy is my number one priority is making sure that your money's protected more than anything else in the world. But in the off chance where something happens, right? I mean, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, right? I can do my best to have multiple safety nets, but if something were to happen, I don't want you to be in the doghouse, right? I don't want your kids to stop eating because of something, that happened with our real estate deal. So I don't want to take your last $100,000. However, if something were to happen, an emergency were to happen, I've had scenarios where I replace one investor with another,
Sure.
Where hey, this individual, let's cash them out at the the net asset value that their money is in, and then we'll bring this investor in. They buy the position, the income stream is more established now, so they pay a little bit more of a premium, and then so I have done that, right? I have replaced investors before.
And then the other interesting thing you talked about is the tax benefits.
Yeah.
So if someone's investing with you, say they have $100,000, they're like, I want to invest with you. How do they get tax benefits?
Yeah. So, again, I hate to say that again, but it depends on the property. But, obviously there's this thing called straight line depreciation where, if we buy a piece of real estate, the IRS allows us to take the value of the building, not the land, and divide it by 27.5 years. And then that's the cycle, that's the schedule that we can depreciate that property for. And every single year, we take that depreciation, and there's obviously K1s with partnerships, and that's the tax benefits that we receive. Now, granted, there's other things like loss carry forward. There's we can do a cost segregation study and accelerate the depreciation. There's a lot of things that we can do, but especially for physicians, and I'll mention it because that's a lot of the individuals that listen. Is that's honestly in my conversations that I had with physicians in the past. For most of them, that's actually the number one reason as to why they're even interested in real estate is the tax benefits of owning a piece of real estate. And that's why for me, it's like, I love the aspect of the long-term hold because, if an asset's giving you great returns and you're getting a lot of great tax benefits from it, then, why stop it, right? Like why stop the train from continuing to chug along, unless of course we get an amazing offer, but.
So as a W-2 employee, as someone who's working, physicians and other employed people, they make a good living. However, it isn't as great as it looks on paper because so much of it goes to taxes. So can you go into a little bit more details? Because I know people are going to ask, what exactly does that tax break look like?
Yeah. So, I've had scenarios where, and of course, 9 out of 10 deals I've done in the past, I've given my investors, 100% of the depreciation, right? Which, a lot of times they could write off against their investment income. There's certain things you can do depending on what your financial situation is, who your CPA is, and how, lucrative that they want to be. I have a great tax professional. Shout out to my buddy, Steve Hamilton. I don't think there's anybody better than him, in all honesty, right? And he's well worth it. But, it depends on how lucrative you want to be, right? With your personal taxes. I've had investors who, to minimize their tax, implications of their income, they've invested in my deal with 2 separate entities, right? So they invested one as themselves, and they've invested in one utilizing a self-directed IRA, right? So somebody who invested $100,000 to one. So this is a great example. So I did a 36-unit building about 5 years ago, and I had 2 investors who were putting in $100,000 each, but they put $50,000 in their own name and then $50,000 in their self-directed IRA. And what's really interesting is, when it came time for me to do, K1s and issue paperwork, I had to treat them as 2 different investors, the self-directed IRA versus the person. I have to treat them as two different investors because of what they wanted to do with their tax benefits. So, imagine if we buy a piece of real estate and the building is worth $275,000, let's say, divide that by 27 and a half, every single year for 27 and a half years, we're receiving $10,000 in depreciation, right, in tax benefits. Investors able to take that $10,000 and hopefully, have it be advantageous to their income that they already have, So, I'm not saying that buying a piece of real estate will automatically fix all your tax problems, right? But what I am saying is, for a lot of CPAs and tax professionals, especially the ones that are smart and very lucrative, having an investor have ownership stake of a piece of real estate and being a limited partner in a real estate deal, especially if it's like a larger deal, right? Like a self-storage facility or an apartment complex, and hopefully the GP, which is the general partner, is generous enough to offer 100% of the tax benefits like we do. There's a lot. You're giving your CPA and your tax professional a lot to work with, So again, I'm not saying it's going to fix all your problems, but it does give a lot of extra ammo, let's say, to your CPA and tax professionals to be able to move things around and help you, mitigate a lot of the tax consequences. And in fact, a lot of the wealthy individuals that I meet, that's like the number one thing that they care about is tax avoidance. Is how can they structure their entities and frameworks and financial vehicles and investable assets so that way they can pay as little as tax as they can on their primary income.
You talked about something, the self-directed IRA, because a lot of the physicians I know, you spend a lot of time learning about doctor things, learn about medicine things.
Yeah.
And a lot of physicians also will put money in, I can't remember the term, but in a like some sort of fund. It's like a 401k, but it's specifically for their kids' education.
Okay.
So theoretically, they could also put money in a self-directed IRA and then invest it with you as well. And then in 20 years, take that money out and then invest it. And they can also have like the fund, but that would be another vehicle. So can you get a little bit, give some details as to how someone would use a self-directed IRA?
Yeah. So honestly, what I would actually even recommend, if you're a physician and you've got a lot of great extra cash flow, I recommend actually utilizing the infinite banking strategy. So that's actually something that my brother and I are going to come out with an offer here pretty shortly that helps people, learn and get involved with infinite banking. But something that's a better vehicle for, if you're.
Wait, what is infinite banking? Just to jump in, what's infinite banking?
So infinite banking is a strategy, and I would not recommend going on YouTube or researching it, because there's a lot of people who don't actually know what it is. So it was actually initially created by a guy named Nelson Nash, who created the Nelson Nash Institute. And the concept of infinite banking, if I were to put this in a nutshell, is you becoming your own banker. In fact, the book that he wrote, that Nelson Nash wrote, that talks about IBC for what it truly is titled Becoming Your Own Banker. So I would actually recommend, if you're a physician or if you're any high-earning W-2 employee and you're looking to have a better alternative to retirement, something you want to put your money into and not have to worry about, I would highly encourage, and again, this is not financial advice. Of course, I have to give that disclaimer, but that's something that I did, right? So my wife and I, we actually have 3 policies. And what you're utilizing with infinite banking, at its core, what the core strategy is you open up and you utilize a whole life insurance policy as a platform to then become your own banker. And, you take any extra cash flow that you have, you put it into the policy, you can overfund the policy, overfund the cash value. And when the time is right, after 5, 10, 15 years of building and accruing the cash value of that policy, you can actually take a loan out against that policy and you can actually bank with yourself. So really all it is at the end of the day is taking back the control of capital. Because if you think about what keeps a lot of individuals at middle class or if there's any like a glass ceiling that prevents people from being wealthy, it's the relationship that people have with banks, right? So whether it's credit cards, student loans, 30-year mortgage, gosh, I could go down the list of so many times and how often, we utilize banking services. And I hate to break it to you, but when you're getting a 30-year mortgage, the mortgage is structured to where the banks make money. They're not there to help you, right? Like if you were to get a $300,000 mortgage at and even a very generous 4%, 30-year amortization, that first payment that you're making, 70% of it goes to interest to the banks, and only 30%, 20% goes to actually you paying off the property. And what's funny is that it's not until about year 14 on average, if you're looking at a 30-year note, it's not until year 13 or 14 where the payment that you're making on a monthly basis is 50% principal and 50% interest, right? And even after that, right, like you start eventually, right, you start paying more principal than interest. But the sad reality is, what do most Americans do before they even reach that 13-14% mark? Is they refinance. And when you refinance, people think that's good because you're lowering the monthly payment. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But what it is doing is resetting that amortization clock to where you're going back after 13, 14 years, you're going back to paying 70% interest, 30% principal, right? Like, I would encourage you guys to do this yourself. Like download a mortgage calculator app. I use Carl's mortgage calculator, and if you put in the numbers yourself, right? Like, I'll put it in right now. If you do, if you're buying a property for $300,000, right? And you're putting 20% down at 4% interest, 30-year amortization, by the end of that note, you've paid a total of $172,486.82 in interest. And a very high majority of that is being paid out in the first 5-10 years. So, if you can remove yourself from those type of scenarios and become your own bank, especially if you're a physician, you're making a lot of money and you've got a lot of extra cash flow, in my opinion, the best way to do it is increase and accrue that cash value and take the loan out against your policy and then invest that into a piece of real estate. Like, if you could do that, it's like, holy cow, that's phenomenal. Like, that's
so
really
I'll
good.
tell you, I can speak for like 90% of the physicians I know. They're like, wow, 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 that's a lot of words. So I'm going to do this for my colleagues. So for my colleagues who are working like 60-70 hours a week, then they have to like hang out with their kids and they want to like try to get to the gym and maybe eat a salad. So they have a bunch of money and they're like, I don't want to read all this stuff because I don't have time. What do I do with my money? And as a quick side note, so I'll tell you, is my parents invested in a 401k when I was really young. Someone talked them into it, and like 20 years later, it was worth the exact same amount. Like, it did nothing. I know now. I think being diversified is fine, but I don't think the stock market's magic. There's fees, and there are a lot of fees in the stock market as well. Tons of fees. So they have a bunch of money, they want to be diversified, and they want to like invest it in some way, shape, or form. Like, in a really simple way, let's say they have $100,000 and they're sitting there and they're like, what do I do with this? What would you advise them to do? They're like, Daniel, I have this money. What do I do with it?
For sure. Yeah. So, I mean, even investing that money into a piece of real estate, I think is a great idea, especially if you're looking to diversify. But, again, if you're not looking to do all the mumbo
they're like, I don't want to do it. I have to work.
Sure.
I have to work.
That's a lot of work.
I don't want to like deal with the broken toilet at 3 a.m. What do I do, Daniel?
For sure.
Help me.
Yeah. And if you want to invest that out of your retirement account, even just putting that in a self-directed IRA and investing that money through that vehicle and putting it into a piece of real estate, I mean, that right there is that's great. I mean, because to your point, you don't have to fix a broken toilet at 3 a.m. in the morning. You don't have to get up and take care of tenants and manage it, right? Guys like me will do all that for you, right?
All right. So how would they do that? So they're like, okay, I need this to go somewhere. Daniel, I have the money. What do I do? What is the first step? What do I do? I have the money. I need you to invest it for me.
Yeah. First thing we do is let's have a conversation, right? Let's see if that's, if you and I are a good fit, right? I'm not one of those guys that always assume that just because you have money, you should work with me, right?
Sure.
A lot of times when I have conversations with investors and I kind of hear what they're looking for, more than half the time I go, you know what? I don't think you and I are a great fit, but I've got a buddy who's doing this type of real estate that I think you'd be amazing for. And I think those type of deals, it's going to be better for you financially. So, I mean, even if we don't end up doing business together, I always do my best to add value and serve the person on the other line and say, hey, I think I've got a buddy who, is a better fit. So, if you're an individual and you're really considering investing in real estate and diversifying, or you at least want to get more information, I'd say let's have a conversation and, I'll do my best to point you towards the right direction.
If you could highlight some of the things that you would look for in working with someone who wants to be an investor, what are some of the things you look for?
Yeah, I say, especially if you're passive, be people oriented. Like, the real estate business is not about properties, it's about people. So, if you're great at vetting great people,
I mean, like, if someone wants to invest with you, what is something that you're looking for where someone's like, hey, I want to invest with you, like, what would make me a good candidate to invest with you?
Yeah, no, so I actually would say the same thing.
Okay.
So, you
Oh,
know,
okay, sorry.
so somebody who's really focused on building a relationship, and you know, somebody who wants to get to know me, and me wanting to get to know them. Because for me, the way I see it is, if I can get to know you better financially, that allows me to serve you at a better degree, you know? So individuals who really focus on the people aspect of things instead of just, hey, here's what I want in a deal, right? And that's okay too, right? I have investors who are like, Daniel, here's $200,000, never talk to me ever again. Just send me your quarterly reports and we're good, right? And that's okay. That's completely okay. That's the best way that I can serve them. But for me, I found that if an individual is, hey, let's get on a quick 20-minute call and let me get to learn about you and what you're wanting and your financial health and all this stuff, that gives me more ammo to be able to better serve you, right? Because that way I know what type of deals to put you in, right? Because do I want to put you in a development deal? Do I want to put you in a self-storage deal, an apartment deal that's structured all these different ways, right? It's going to be different, you know? And what I'm going to recommend and suggest is going to be very different as well. So, you know, if they're people oriented and, you know, and not people oriented in the manner they're extroverted, but, you know, if they look to really seek, right? And they allow me to ask questions and get to know them. For me, that's the biggest benefit. That's what I look for.
Cool. Gabe, do you have any other questions?
Yeah,
I've been
I mean,
monopolizing this conversation. I apologize.
no, it's all good. No, I'm yeah, just before we move to wrap this up, Daniel, I just want to congratulate you on having a YouTube channel with 300,000 subscribers. And
Thank you.
what strikes me as interesting there is you seem like you're extremely busy reviewing 1,600 deals a year. You have a young family, you know, you're a very successful real estate investor, and yet here you are running a YouTube channel with regular content and 300,000 subscribers. What drives you, and what made you start the YouTube channel? What have you learned from it, and what keeps you going?
Yeah, so our YouTube channel was initially about real estate and the housing market and you know, finance. But you know, I had a friend of mine who now works for me. He's our primary producer. He's like, hey, I think you should really talk about this thing called the Great Reset. And you know, it's this concept, and it's not a conspiracy theory anymore because they're literally coming out and saying they're going to do it.
It's the World Economic Forum, right?
It's the World Economic Forum, and it's this thing that they want to do to completely change the world, right? And I started looking more into it, and I was like, wow, this is really interesting stuff. And the reason why I got into it is because, you know, the Great Reset is a reset on our world economic framework, is what it is, right? That, if I were to wrap this up in a nutshell, that's exactly what it is, you know? They want to replace capitalism. They want to create a world where, you know, there's one digitalized currency. There's more control from the government, you know, to us, the people. The people have less autonomy, right? That's pretty much what it is for what all the stuff that I researched. And I said, man, this thing, if this happens, it's going to affect markets. It's going to affect investing. It's going to affect a lot of the things related to money, and in a negative way for the average person, like guys like me and you that are just at the end of the day just trying to create, you know, a wonderful living for our families, for our wives, leave something behind for the next generation, right? Like these guys really want to mess with that, you know, and they want to create a world where we're more reliant on the government. And I just wasn't a big fan of that. You know, I didn't think it was biblical, for one. And I just didn't like that idea. And, you know, it kind of pointed towards the negativity of mankind, right? The desire for more control, more power, and greed. So I did one video on it, and it got, you know, it did really well. It got like over 150 to 60,000 views. Did another video on it, you know, it got 400,000 views. Did another video on it, it got over 1 million views. And I was like, okay, like people want to hear about this, right? Like people want the truth, you know? So, you know, my YouTube channel has become much more about, you know, I don't want to say political, but it's more about truth, right? Is what we say. And we do our best to, you know, kind of unravel what's happening with the World Economic Forum, what's happening with, you know, different scenarios. And, you know, we'll do videos like if you know, the Biden administration comes out with a tax policy, we'll do we'll do a video covering it and giving our own thoughts on it. But you know, it is very busy. I'll confess, I'm filming tomorrow at 8 a.m. and I'm probably going to be up till 3 a.m. tonight writing the video. But you know, one of the things that I'm very fortunate of is not that it's fortunate or unfortunate, but I don't have kids yet, so that gives me a lot of time. You know, and Kris is, you know, he's chuckling over there because he knows, right? Kids take up a lot of time. You know, I've seen it with my brother, and I've seen it with a lot of friends of mine who have multiple young children. They do require a lot of attention, and rightfully so. So for me, my wife and I, we don't have kids yet. And, it's just something for me that I just genuinely find interesting. If there's anything that I'm very grateful for, as much as, I work, and as equally as much as I rest, there's not a thing that I do in my life that I don't love. Like, I love every single part of it. I don't do a single thing that where it's like, I'd rather not do that. Like, every single thing I do, I'm genuinely interested in. Like, the video that I'm writing tonight, like, I'm genuinely interested in the topic, and I can't wait to write it. So I mean, I guess that's kind of my way of balancing things, or the lack of, is, I only try to do things that I'm very passionate and very good at.
That's excellent. And Daniel, I mean, you've accomplished more in your first 28 years than a lot of people do in their entire lifetime. What are your goals for the next, say, 10 years?
Yeah, so I'll kind of spin that answer with just overall health, right? My mentor once told me that, Daniel, it's great to have goals. It's better to have standards and expectations. And for me, I'm a man that's not, goal oriented. I'm more so driven, and I'm led. So, if I'm being honest, like, every day I wake up and I kind of just go, all right, God, what do you have for me today? What is God leading me to do today? Right. In fact, if you look at the life of Jesus, that's how he lived, right? He says, I only do as I see my Father doing. So, my goal isn't to have, a $2 billion real estate fund or a $5 billion company, right? And I'm sure it'll get there at a certain point. But for me, it's like, all right, God, what do you want me to do today? How can I love and serve the people around me to the best of my abilities? How can I be present? And for me, that's how I try to live life. So I guess 5 more years of that, right, is what I'm looking forward to.
I love it. That's powerful. Thank you.
And to close out, some standard questions we ask everyone. What's your how do you deal with stress? Because you're taking on a lot. You're working till 3 a.m. You're recording tomorrow. You're doing what you love, but it's still stressful. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, a couple of things. So the question I ask myself is this thing that I'm concerned about, is that something that's going to be on my mind 5 years from now? And 95% of things are no. And honestly, because I don't really stress out. My wife asked me this question the other day. She's like, how are you never stressed? Like, you're in high stakes situations all the time. Like, how are you never ever feeling the pressure? And I wish I could give you a different answer, but I don't really feel pressure. And that's, mainly because, my relationship with God. And again, if I'm being honest, right? Like, I know that he leads me in all things. I know he's got everything under control. And a lot of people would say that's foolish, but he's never failed, right? Like, that's never failed me, and it won't, so I'd say that's if I'm being honest, that's kind of how I manage stress. And I'm the type of guy where it's like, even if things are happening, I don't freak out, I don't panic. I just find what's the best route, what's the best strategy for us to move forward. What does God want me to do? I stay cool, calm, collected, and we get through it to the best of our ability. So the one thing that I do have a lot of confidence in, and the reason why I don't stress out about a lot of things, is because a lot of my confidence comes from the fact that no matter what happens, I know and I trust myself that I'll always do the right and ethical thing. I'll always put other people before myself, even if it's behind closed doors. So for me, I know that, at the end of the day, I'm fulfilling my mission, right? Which is the mission that God has for me, which is, hey, are you loving and serving my other children well? And if I do that, mission accomplished, right?
And then the last question to close it out. So as far as the Get Healthy 360, we've covered spiritual health, mental health, financial health. What about your physical practice? How do you stay in shape?
Yeah, so I love working out, and I encourage people to find what they love, right? So for me, I can't stand running. I can't do it. If you ask me to run a mile, that's torture, right? However, if you ask me to play 2 hours of basketball, I'm in, right? Like, I'll be the first guy to lace up my shoes and, get out there and run around, and I end up, sweating and working out way more than if I just ran. But I also love lifting weights, and, I love mixed martial arts, so I love hitting the bag and all this stuff. So, I always encourage people, like, find something you genuinely love. For some people, it's golf, right? That's something I've got into recently, and my wife and I are starting to golf more now. But, whether it's golfing, whether it's hitting the bag, whether it's just going on a walk, right? you know, doing something to be active, you know, for me, it's absolutely key, you know. So for me, thankfully, I'm young. I'm still 28. My joints are still healthy. My body's still working, you know. So I'm able to do things like spar and, you know, hit the bag and play golf and play basketball for 2-3 hours. But the one thing that I am focused on now is something I've noticed is my diet. So my wife is a huge health nut. She's very natural. She's very into the holistic and, you know, those aspects of things. And she's been trying to get me to eat less fried food. You know, cookies and ice cream are my biggest weakness. That's like my Achilles heel, man. Or if you give me brownies and Oreo ice cream, it's game over, right? Like it's you know, McFlurries from Oreo McFlurry from McDonald's, Dairy Queen, you know, cookies, cakes, cheesecakes, I mean, you name it. I love sweets, so I try to limit to one dessert a day, which for most people it's like you're crazy because even that's too much. But you know, for me, it's helpful to have, you know, an accountability partner like my wife, who's kind of going, hey, you know, is that something that you should be eating right now? You know, hey, let's limit to one thing a day. And you know, she always does things out of love, and you know, the ability for me to see her heart and, you know, understand why she's encouraging me to eat better. It's, you know, it's encouraging. I had a friend recently who's very close to me. He's, you know, in his early 50s, who just had a heart attack. And you know, he's an active guy, and you know, he works out, you know, from the outside, a very healthy dude, but you know, his Achilles heel has always been his diet, you know. So he loved, same thing like me, right? He loved fried food, loved eating food for taste, not for nutrition and health. He loved cookies, ice cream, chips, just like me. And you know, he was talking to the doctors and he's like, yep, that's the main culprit. So he now completely changed his diet. And for me, you know, a big aspect of health, whether it's finance, spiritual, whether it's mental, whether it's physical, is be proactive, not reactive. So for me, I'm learning how to be proactive in my diet before I have to be reactive.
As a physician that sees a lot of the consequences of a poor diet and lack of exercise, if it's a difference between investing and burning yourself out if you're working a full-time job and putting in that time at the gym, I would say you can't buy your health. Like you have to physically put in the time. So find someone that you trust to invest the money with, and then go to the gym. Go to the gym, because if like once you get that heart attack or you get the diabetes that sets in, fixing it it's much easier to fix it proactively. So if you're investing, invest in your health and let someone else do the mechanics. That'd be my suggestion that's my official position as a physician.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and even for me, you know, I had to make the time to work out because, you know, I had a mentor told me, he's like, dude, if you're working 70 hours a week to keep your business afloat, there's something wrong with your business. You're not doing something right. You know, your business is not healthy, right? So, you know, for me, I remember when I got married, I was worried because I used to work 14 hours a day before I got married, right? And now that I'm married, I can only work 10 hours a day, 9, 10 hours a day, right? Before I have to go home and have dinner with the wife and spend quality time with her. I've actually found that to be more beneficial because I've had to learn how to do in 9 hours what it originally takes me 14 hours. And I've had to learn to be more efficient. And because of it, I got healthier, my physical health got healthier, my business health is significantly improved because I'm learning to be more efficient and delegate and actually have people take ownership of certain tasks and, you know, be a leader of leaders. So I would echo 100% of what you just said, right? I mean, so, you know, exactly what you said, Kris. Leave your money with guys like me so that you can go and work out and have fun and spend time with your kids. So, but yeah, I echo everything you said, man.
Awesome. Oh, and then I would be remiss. So you also have a mentorship program. I know we won't keep closing it out, but you have a mentorship program. What does that look like?
Yeah, so you know, I help people invest actively and passively. So, you know, if you want to be an active investor and do a lot of things yourself, then, you know, we have a program. You know, we do have a money back guarantee where within 15 months, if you don't do your first deal, then, you know, we give you a refund as long as you put in the required amount of time and work. But, you know, it's a very it's not a high intense program, but the main premise of the coaching program is, you know, I help you do in 5 years what it takes other people 10 years to do, you know. So because I found a lot of success early on, you know, I learned a lot of hacks, right? A lot of techniques, you know, I don't want to say shortcuts because, you know, the quality doesn't go down, but, you know, that's something I'm passionate about as well. So, you know, we do a lot of, you know, events and training, and we do weekly calls, modules, you know, and all it is helping people accomplish something in half the time with less headache, with less money that has to be lost, you know, and that's what our coaching program is all about. It's First Deal Mentor. That's what it's called. And obviously, as we discussed, I help people do it passively too. So thanks for bringing that up, man.
And how much does it cost to be, so we talked about the syndication if someone wants to do passively, but for those who are like, nope, I want to do this on my own, what does the mentorship program cost?
Yeah, so it's 15 grand. So, I look at other coaching programs, other products that I've personally bought. I've paid 20,000, 30,000. There's coaching programs out there for 50,000. And they don't give you the attention that we give them, right? So a lot of times people pay 40, 50, $60,000 for just videos, right? And they say that we offer coaching, but when you take advantage of the coaching, it's just like a customer service agent, right? I've been burned like that before, which is why I know so much about it. But we do our best to charge a fraction of what the other guys charge, but give 20 times the value, So it's a $15,000 number, and again, we try to give more than what we take.
So I interviewed someone else who's a real estate investor, and they were charging, I think it was about $100,000 for their mentorship program. I'm assuming you'd have to have a lot of money to afford that, just
sure.
coaching.
Yeah.
But that's what their coaching program was. So with that mentorship, just to clarify, so how long is it, and what do you really get?
Yeah, so it's 15 months, and you get group coaching, you get modules, video modules. You also get 4 events out of the year where you and I actually get to work together face to face, and that involves you coming to Chicago. We do retreats, right? Those are all included in the cost of entry, and a lot of those events are geared towards having an intentional time where I can look at your business and your investments and kind of just make suggestions, right? Say, hey, here's what we can do. Here's the action items I recommend. Here are your deal channels. Here's how I would leverage your relationships, and in the off chance where, people come in, and this has happened before, where people, pay that coaching fee, they come in and they actually learn that they want to be a passive investor more so than an active investor. I help them out with that too, so I try to do my best to serve the individual as much as I can. But, the goal at the end of the day, the problem that we're solving is, hey, we just help you do your first deal within 15 months. That's the time frame, the timeline that we give you is, because if you could do the first one well, then the second, third one, fourth one will be, easier. You get the repetition. So, we try to charge as little as we can, but give as much offer and value we can.
Compared to what's out there, it's a very reasonable price, especially for what you're giving. And what if, I know this question will come up, what if it's a couple, same price?
Yep, 2 for 1. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Which is actually like a really good deal, because if you have a couple split, it's harder to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Gabe, any closing thoughts?
No, Daniel, thank you very much for your time. It was a really engaging and enjoyable conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was an honor for me to be here. Thank you for your guys' questions. Thank you for your time. I really enjoyed this, and hopefully we get to connect even more in the future.
Fantastic. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the future as economic things unfold. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much again. Have a great night.